I really liked drawing when I was a kid. For a long time, I thought I wanted to be a writer. And when I went to college, I started out in a writing program. I wanted to write children's books. And then I wanted to illustrate the children's books. So I went back to school as an art major and started learning about artists like Christo and Jean-Claude, and was completely captivated by the way that they engaged the public with art. One of the things that I liked about quilting when I first got started was that quilting is a great way to piece two different perspectives together, like, a straight-on view of the wetland and a map view, like a USGS survey view. So you can sort of overlap these two perspectives and then throw the title in, and it's three perspectives, because now you have to compare it to the image in your mind when you read those words. Proposed Deep Pit Mine Site started when my husband Rob was making a documentary about mining in the state of Wisconsin. There was a couple of proposals to open up some rather large deep pit mines. This is very difficult fabric to control. So I need a way to get it on a secure surface so that I can paint it and control where the the dye goes. Okay. Yeah, when people ask me, how did you get into quilting? I just want to point something out. I live in Wisconsin, and I'm looking at this thermometer right now. The temperature is 14 degrees Fahrenheit. So it all started when Rob and I were living in a drafty old building, and it was just plain cold. So I started making quilts, and very soon I saw that the cutting and piecing of quilt making enabled me to put these different perspectives together. The other thing I love about quilting is that everybody has a quilt story. It's about being loved and cared for. And I think that's one of the things I'm trying to say with my work. So if people think about the time their grandmother wrapped them in a warm quilt, it's perfect. All of these quilts are based on real experiences. And when I first started bird watching, I just thought they were such beautiful creatures. My ultimate goal was to get cedar waxwings to my yard because they're spectacularly beautiful birds. We were living in the city at the time, so I was telling my studio mate about cedar waxwings, and he mentioned that his wife worked at AT&T and that every fall, flocks of cedar waxwings would come to the parking lot and eat the berries off the trees in the median strip. About a month later, he said they're there. So I drive out, and sure enough, there were hundreds and hundreds of cedar waxwings. And while I was sitting there, I realized a bird's eye view of a parking lot is so quiltish, or quilt-like. Let me say that a little better. A bird's eye view of a parking lot is a very quilt-like pattern. So I thought, I'm going to do a quilt about this. Well, while I was making the quilt, AT&T laid off 40,000 workers. So when I did the people walking around in the parking lot, I just gave them little pink slips. It's very small. But anyway, I just had to put that in there in honor of the workers. But you know what? Here's the other concern, that in about 10 years, these cars are all going to look ancient. They will. When we lived in Milwaukee, I walked almost every day in the seminary woods. Well, there's a little road that meandered along this forest, and the DOT, the Department of Transportation, decided that they needed to expand this road and straighten it out. And I thought, I wish they could walk this with me and see what they're really doing here to this place. So I think the quilt, is again a comparison between these two perspectives.
I think the workmanship, the craftsmanship, just the attention to detail really catches your eye at first. And then you kind of delve into what she's trying to tell us. She's interested in social justice, interested in making a statement, but it's not really in your face. You have to look at this carefully. What has happened to our natural forests, our environment, all in the name of progress.
What I think is interesting about the history of quilt making is that although we tend to assume that it's more of a loving hands at home kind of thing, they're made for family use, they're made to adorn a bed, and that's really their place. In fact, historically, quilts have been a very important medium of expression for women, not only within the home, but at state fairs, in women's exhibitions. Throughout the 19th century in particular, women's quilt making was really showcased publicly quite a lot. They were a way for women to really express their own creativity in the public sphere as well as at home.
I wanted to have someone walking through the forest that looked a little bit like a bureaucrat, because it would be so nice if they did walk through the forest, just so that they would know what their lines went through in the real, tangible world. To tell you the truth, though, he's a leftover from Cedar waxwings at the AT&T parking lot. He's a pink slip. That wasn't really supposed to be there, but it just ended up there. I got the idea to make Portrait of a Textile Worker one day while I was working away at my sewing machine, and I always listened to the radio when I'm at the machine, and Charlie Kernighan, the director of the Institute for Labor and Human Rights, was giving an interview, and he was describing the appalling treatment of these garment workers at a plant in Nicaragua, where the women were forced to work 14 to 17 hours a day, 6 and 7 days a week. Immediately, I knew I wanted to do something to help them. So I was walking through a department store, and I'm seeing these huge signs, that say Ralph Lauren, Eddie Bauer, Calvin Klein. We've all seen these signs. And then I remembered these women, and I thought, yeah, but what are their names? And it seemed like the obvious thing to do would be to create a portrait, an identity, using all the little identification labels on the clothes that they make and we wear. I knew I wanted to base it on a real person that was in one of these factories. So I contacted the Institute for Global Labor and Human Rights and said, now, does Charlie Kernighan, has he got any photographs that I could use for this? Well, they very graciously sent me a couple hundred. And I just kept coming back to this one because this woman just had this calm poise. And so I start this process. I don't exactly have a way to do it yet. But pretty soon I figured out, I'm going to need thousands and thousands and thousands of these things, because it isn't just a matter of the numbers. It was a matter of finding, the right tones, the right black, the right white, the right gray. And at some point it just took on a life of its own. And I started to get labels from all over the country. I started to get them from all over the world. I had no idea how people were even finding out about it. Every day I would go to my P.O. box, and I think it's one of the most uplifting things that ever happened. I would get these sweet notes from people, and the thing that blew my mind is that they took the time to go to their closet and cut the labels out one by one. To me, that's the strongest part of the whole piece, because it's not just my opinion, it's a chorus of voices. It's a lot of people who are concerned about what's happening from all sides of the political spectrum.
Somehow it's almost like schizophrenic that we can be buying things and never ask, well, who are these people? How old are they? What did they pay? Did they have the right to organize? Did they go to school? How did they live? Can they get an education? We have to now become real global citizens. It took this mural to actually give the dignity back to these workers.
The portrait of a textile worker is something very personal to us. I contributed every label of most of my clothing, which I can tell you was missing a lot of labels, so I don't even know who made it anymore. It was a good contribution for us to make and made us very aware not only of the struggles of those workers that stitch our clothes, but also the fact that they were no longer made by the people in the United States, and that those people that were making them were being exploited. When I saw the quilt in person, I walked up to it and I can honestly tell you, I could identify my labels. And so it's personal to a lot of us. I don't know how many I did, but everybody in our office, everybody we knew, my daughter, my husband, we were labelless for a long time.
My quilts take from 1 to 3 years to make, because they're usually extremely detailed, and that's not slouching around either. It's like a full-time job. We're always trying to increase productivity and consume more, and my work is the opposite of that. It slows everything way down. I'm trying to make an object that's valuable. It's also not a one-liner. Like, I try to put a lot in for a viewer to see. And part of that is an expression of how rich and detailed the world is. I have come to really love craft and the idea of craft, because my subject matter is the kind of thing that can be very repellent to people. But craft, in particular the craft of quilting, there's a familiarity with the objects and the materials and the way the materials are used. What I'm looking for is common ground with shared experiences with people. It's the perfect medium.